There is a reason this message found you today. Not yesterday, not last week, today. And as strange as this sounds, I don't think it's a coincidence, because lately something has felt different, hasn't it? You haven't been able to explain it. It's not just about them. It's not even about the connection anymore. It's deeper than that. It's like you've been standing in the middle of a room that suddenly feels unfamiliar. The same memories are there, the same stories, the same unanswered questions. Yet somehow, you don't feel the same inside them. And that is what keeps catching your attention. Because for the longest time, they lived in your mind without effort. A random song would play, and there they were. You'd pass a familiar place, and there they were. You'd wake up from a dream that felt more real than reality itself. And there they were again. Sometimes it felt like your entire emotional world had become tied to their presence. Or maybe their absence. But something shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. More like the tide quietly pulling away from a shoreline. So slowly that nobody notices at first. Not even you. And yet, here you are.
Watching this.
Feeling something inside your chest react to words you haven't even fully heard yet. Because part of you already knows. Part of you has known for a while. The version of you that was constantly reaching for them is getting harder to find. The version that checked for signs. The version that searched for hidden meanings. The version that turned every silence into a question. That version is becoming distant. Almost like an old photograph. Still visible. Still important. But no longer who you are. And this is where things become strange. Because the moment you stopped holding on to them so tightly, you started feeling them differently. Not closer, not farther, just different. As if the connection itself was trying to tell you something. As if the silence wasn't empty after all. Have you noticed that? How silence changes shape. At first it feels like rejection, then confusion, then loneliness. But eventually, if you stay with it long enough, it becomes a mirror. And mirrors reveal things we'd rather not see. The truth about who was carrying the connection. The truth about who kept showing up emotionally. The truth about how much of your energy had been flowing outward instead of inward. I wasn't expecting this message to go here, but something important is coming through. The person you've been thinking about. The one who believed you would always stay available. Never imagined you would become comfortable without their attention. They may not fully understand it yet, but they feel it. Not because you've disappeared, because your energy no longer revolves around them. And when someone grows accustomed to being the center of your emotional universe, your silence becomes impossible to ignore. Not because it's loud, because it's unfamiliar. And that unfamiliar feeling is the beginning of everything changing. Don't forget to subscribe our channel. The strange part isn't that you've changed. The strange part is that they can feel it, even if you haven't spoken, even if months have passed, even if there's distance between you that seems impossible to cross. Something inside them knows, and that's what keeps surfacing when they're least expecting it. Not during the busy moments, not when life is loud, but during the quiet spaces, the spaces where distractions lose their power. A late night, a long drive, a familiar street, a song they haven't heard in months, and suddenly, there you are, not physically, energetically, like a memory that refuses to stay buried, like a presence they can't fully explain. This is strange, because for so long they were used to feeling your attention. Whether they realized it or not, your thoughts reached toward them, your emotions reached toward them, your hope reached toward them. There was always an invisible thread connecting you. And then one day, that thread loosened, not because it broke, because you stopped pulling on it. You stopped forcing movement where there was resistance. You stopped carrying conversations inside your head. You stopped creating emotional scenarios that only left you exhausted. You stopped trying to decode every silence. And the moment that happened, the energy shifted. You may not have noticed it immediately, but they did. At first it appeared as restlessness, a feeling they couldn't identify, an irritation with no obvious cause, a strange sense that something was missing. The problem was, they couldn't figure out what. Because people often notice energy long before they understand it. And your energy had become familiar to them, like background music, always present, always available, always there, until it wasn't. And when something constant disappears, the absence becomes impossible to ignore. You already feel this deep down. You've probably sensed moments lately where memories seem to return out of nowhere. Moments where their energy feels unusually close. Moments where dreams become more vivid. Where random reminders appear. Where their name surfaces unexpectedly. And maybe you've wondered, why now? Why after all this time? Why when I'm finally starting to move forward? Something important is coming through, because this isn't necessarily about them reaching out. It's about the energetic space you've created. For the first time in a long time, your soul isn't entirely occupied by waiting. And when waiting leaves, awareness enters. You begin noticing things differently. You begin feeling yourself again. The version of you that existed before confusion, before attachment, before emotional survival became a full-time job. And that's when another shift begins, a deeper one. You start remembering who you are outside of the connection, outside of the story, outside of the longing. That realization changes everything, because people often believe they are attached to another person, but many times they are attached to a version of themselves that existed around that person, a version that hoped, a version that dreamed, a version that believed something beautiful was still possible. And letting go can feel terrifying, because it feels like losing that version too. But what if that's not what's happening? What if you're not losing yourself? What if you're finding yourself? What if all of this, the confusion, the distance, the silence, the unanswered questions, were leading you back to the one person you've neglected the most? You. I wasn't expecting this message to go here, but something deeper is emerging. The reason your energy feels different lately isn't because you've stopped caring. It's because your soul is reclaiming territory. Parts of yourself that were scattered across memories, across hopes, across old timelines, across emotional investments that no longer align with who you're becoming. And every time you choose yourself, another piece returns home. Every time you stop chasing, another piece returns home. Every time you release the need for validation, another piece returns home. That's the real shift. That's what they're sensing. Not rejection, not punishment, not distance, transformation. The kind that happens quietly, the kind nobody notices until it's already complete. And whether they understand it or not, they are witnessing a version of you they have never seen before. A version that no longer needs permission to be whole. A version that is beginning to realize their peace is worth protecting. A version that understands love should never require self-abandonment. And for someone who always expected you to remain exactly the same, the change can feel impossible to ignore, because your silence isn't empty anymore. It's full of self-respect, full of awareness, full of healing. And that is why they feel it, even from afar, even in silence. Even now, there comes a moment in certain connections when the energy quietly changes direction. Not dramatically, not overnight, not in a way anyone can immediately explain. It happens beneath the surface, like an ocean current shifting miles below the water, invisible, yet powerful enough to change everything above it. And if you're hearing this right now, I have a feeling you've already sensed it. Maybe not with your mind, but with your intuition, because something no longer feels the way it used to. The emotional weight you've carried for so long feels different. Lighter. Not gone, but lighter. And that's important, because for a long time, you were carrying more than your share of this connection. You carried the hope, the understanding, the patience, the emotional labor. You carried conversations that never happened, explanations they never gave, closures that never arrived. You carried possibilities, timelines, dreams. And eventually, your soul became tired. Not tired of loving, tired of carrying. There's a difference, a huge difference. This is strange, because when people think of emotional exhaustion, they imagine heartbreak, crying, loss, pain. But real exhaustion often feels quieter than that. It feels like staring at your phone and suddenly not caring as much. It feels like hearing their name and not spiraling the way you once did. It feels like waking up one morning and realizing you've spent less time thinking about them. Not because you forced yourself, because your soul naturally started redirecting its energy back toward you. And that is where the reversal begins. Most people never talk about this stage because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. But spiritually, it changes everything. The person who once occupied your thoughts begins losing their position at the center of your world. Not through anger, not through resentment, simply through absence. Because what isn't nurtured eventually weakens. And for so long, you were nurturing the connection with your attention, your focus, your emotions, your imagination. But now, that energy is flowing somewhere else. Back into your life, back into your healing, back into your future. And whether they realize it consciously or not, they feel that shift, not necessarily as a clear thought, more like an unexplained sensation, a feeling, a pull, a disturbance in a pattern they became accustomed to, because something important is coming through. People often mistake attachment for connection, but they're not the same thing. Attachment says, I need this. Connection says, I feel this. And lately, your attachment has been dissolving, which means for the first time, you're experiencing the connection without losing yourself inside it. That changes everything, because when attachment disappears, clarity enters. You begin seeing things you couldn't see before. The moments you ignored, the patterns you excused, the signs your intuition tried to show you, and suddenly, pieces start fitting together. Not because new information appeared, because emotional fog disappeared. And once that happens, you can never fully return to who you were. I wasn't expecting this message to go here, but there's something else. Part of them believed your attention would always be available. Not in a cruel way necessarily. Sometimes people simply become comfortable. Comfortable with your loyalty. Comfortable with your patience. Comfortable with your presence. Comfortable with knowing you'll still be there. And comfort often creates blindness. People stop noticing what they assume they'll never lose. Until one day, the energy changes. And that's exactly what's happening. Because whether they speak to you or not, whether they reach out or not, whether circumstances allow contact or not, something inside them recognizes that the version of you they relied on is evolving. You are no longer standing in the same place emotionally. You are no longer waiting in the same way. You are no longer carrying the connection in the same way. And that's why they feel unsettled. Not because you're punishing them. Not because you're playing games. Because your soul has started moving. And movement creates distance from old versions of reality. The truth is, your silence has become a mirror. And mirrors reveal things people would rather avoid. What they took for granted. What they overlooked. What they assumed would always remain. And now, they are being forced to sit with those reflections. While you continue becoming someone new, someone calmer, someone stronger, someone less dependent on external validation, someone more connected to themselves. And the more that happens, the stronger this energetic reversal becomes. Because the greatest shift was never happening inside them. It was happening inside you. And everything else is simply responding to that change. There is a truth that rarely reveals itself immediately. In fact, most people don't recognize it until it's already too late. Because human beings have a habit of overlooking what feels permanent. They stop noticing the warmth that's always there. The person who always shows up. The energy that never seems to disappear. The heart that keeps giving. And slowly, without even realizing it, they begin treating that presence like a guarantee. Not a gift, a guarantee. Something important is coming through. For a long time, your presence felt permanent to them. Not because you told them it would be. Because your action spoke louder than words ever could. You stayed. You understood. You forgave. You waited. You gave chances that nobody knew about. You fought silent battles nobody ever saw. There were moments when your heart wanted to walk away, but your soul kept searching for reasons to stay. You kept believing there was something worth saving, something worth understanding, something worth waiting for. And perhaps that's why this connection affected you so deeply, because you weren't investing from the surface. You were investing from the soul. But here's what often happens when someone receives consistent love without fully appreciating it. They adapt to it. It becomes normal, expected, predictable. And once something becomes predictable, its value becomes invisible. This is strange. Because the very things people miss later are usually the things they overlooked while they had them. Your good morning messages, your patience, your understanding, the way you listened, the way you remembered details, the way you cared even when nobody asked you to, the way your energy quietly supported them during difficult seasons. None of those things seemed extraordinary at the time, but now they carry weight, because absence has a way of revealing value, and value often becomes clearest when access disappears. Have you ever noticed how certain memories suddenly become vivid after distance? A random conversation, a laugh, a look, a moment that felt ordinary at the time, yet months later, it returns with surprising intensity. That is exactly what begins happening when someone loses energetic access to a person they underestimated. The memories become louder, not because the past changed, because perception changed. And perception changes everything. I wasn't expecting this message to go here, but there's something deeper beneath all of this. What they miss isn't always what they think they miss. At first, they believe they miss your attention, your messages, your presence, your availability. But as time passes, they begin realizing it was something else, something harder to replace. The way your energy made them feel, seen, accepted, understood, safe. And emotional safety is one of the rarest experiences a person can encounter. Most people spend their lives searching for it, yet when they find it, they often fail to recognize it immediately. Because safety doesn't create drama. It doesn't create chaos. It doesn't create emotional highs and lows. It simply exists, quietly, consistently. And because it feels calm, many people mistake it for something ordinary, until it's gone. Then suddenly, they realize how rare it truly was. The difficult truth is that your energy became part of their emotional landscape, like a familiar place they could always return to, a place they assumed would remain unchanged. But life doesn't work that way. People evolve. People heal. People grow, and growth changes access. The version of you that once tolerated uncertainty has changed. The version of you that accepted breadcrumbs has changed. The version of you that kept proving their worth has changed. And that realization is becoming impossible for them to ignore, because they can feel the difference. Even if they don't understand it, even if they can't explain it, even if they never say a word, they feel it. The certainty they once had about you is disappearing, and certainty is something people rarely appreciate until it's gone. Now questions begin appearing, questions they never had before, questions they never needed to ask before. What if you don't come back? What if you've truly changed? What if they waited too long? What if they misunderstood your value completely? Those questions create a different kind of discomfort, not the discomfort of loss, the discomfort of realization, and realization has a way of arriving late. Sometimes very late, because people see clearly only after familiarity disappears, and what they're beginning to see now is not the version of you they thought would always remain available. They're seeing someone new, someone who has learned from the silence, someone who has learned from the waiting, someone who has learned from the heartbreak, someone whose energy no longer revolves around being chosen. That transformation is powerful, because once a soul stops seeking validation externally, it becomes difficult to control emotionally, difficult to manipulate, difficult to keep trapped inside old cycles. And that's exactly where you are now. The truth is, they never expected your healing. They expected your patience, your understanding, your loyalty. But they didn't expect your evolution. They didn't expect the day would come when your peace became more important than their attention. Yet that day arrived, quietly, without announcements, without conflict, without dramatic endings. Just a slow shift in energy, a slow return to yourself. And now, the person who once assumed your presence would always remain available is being forced to experience something unfamiliar. Life without guaranteed access to your heart. Life without guaranteed access to your energy. Life without guaranteed access to the version of you that always stayed. And whether they admit it or not, that realization is changing everything. Because your absence is no longer teaching them about loss. It's teaching them about value. And sometimes that lesson arrives only after the door they ignored begins closing. Please like, share, and subscribe. There is something most people never understand about silence. They think silence means nothing is happening, nothing is changing, nothing is moving, nothing is being felt. But silence has never been empty. Silence is where everything begins. The ocean looks calm on the surface long before tides begin to shift beneath it. Storms gather before anyone sees the clouds. Seeds break open underground before anyone sees a flower. And souls transform in silence long before anyone notices the change. That's why this period of your life feels so strange. Because from the outside, it may appear as though nothing is happening. The same days, the same routines, the same world. Yet inside, an entirely different reality is unfolding. You feel it, even if you can't explain it. There are moments lately when you catch yourself staring out a window, driving somewhere familiar, lying awake in the middle of the night, and suddenly you feel disconnected from the version of yourself that once carried this connection. Not because the memories disappeared, not because the feelings never existed, but because your soul is beginning to view everything through different eyes. And that changes everything. Because spiritual growth rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, through exhaustion, through heartbreak, through unanswered questions, through the exact situations that force you inward. Something important is coming through. For a long time, you believed your pain was about them, their choices, their distance, their inconsistency, their inability to meet you where you stood emotionally. And yes, those things hurt, deeply. But what if the deepest lesson was never about them? What if the silence was trying to show you something else entirely? Because sometimes life removes certainty for a reason. Sometimes life creates distance for a reason. Sometimes life leaves questions unanswered because the answers you're searching for are pointing in the wrong direction. This is strange, but many people spend years believing they are chasing another person, when in reality, they are chasing a feeling of being chosen, a feeling of being worthy, a feeling of finally receiving the love they have spent their lives trying to earn. And when that realization arrives, it changes everything, because suddenly the connection looks different. The longing looks different. Even the heartbreak looks different. You begin understanding that part of your suffering came from constantly searching outside yourself for something your soul was trying to cultivate internally. And that's when healing begins. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like sunlight entering a room that has been dark for years, one corner at a time. You start noticing things, patterns, cycles, moments you ignored, warnings your intuition tried to give you, times your spirit whispered the truth while your heart begged for a different answer. And suddenly, the silence becomes a teacher. Not a punishment, not a void. A teacher, because silence forces awareness. Without distractions, you begin hearing yourself again. You begin hearing the thoughts buried beneath attachment, the feelings buried beneath longing, the truth buried beneath hope. And sometimes, that truth is uncomfortable, because it asks difficult questions. Questions most people spend their lives avoiding. Why was I willing to settle for uncertainty? Why did I confuse emotional inconsistency with depth? Why did I continue proving my worth to someone who benefited from my doubt? Why did I believe love required suffering? Those questions don't arrive to shame you. They arrive to free you, because awareness always comes before transformation. And transformation is exactly what's happening. You may not realize it fully yet, but your soul is becoming unavailable for experiences that once felt normal. The emotional confusion that once consumed you now feels exhausting. The uncertainty that once kept you attached now feels heavy. The inconsistency that once felt tolerable now feels impossible to ignore. That isn't bitterness. That isn't resentment. That's evolution. And evolution changes your energy. You begin protecting yourself differently, thinking differently, feeling differently, responding differently. Even your silence begins carrying a different frequency, because your silence is no longer filled with waiting. It's filled with awareness, and awareness changes everything. This is where many people become confused, because they assume healing means forgetting. But healing isn't forgetting. Healing is remembering yourself, remembering who you were before the attachment, before the obsession, before the endless search for validation, before someone else's attention became connected to your sense of worth. And every day, a little more of that person returns, the person beneath the heartbreak, the person beneath the longing, the person beneath the fear of abandonment. You, the real you, the version that existed long before this connection entered your life. And that's why your energy feels unfamiliar lately, because you're meeting yourself again, for the first time in a very long time. I wasn't expecting this message to go here, but something deeper is coming through. Part of your soul already knew this chapter was ending. Not necessarily the connection, not necessarily the story, but the version of you that existed inside it. That version was built around waiting, built around hoping, built around trying to understand someone who couldn't fully understand themselves. And now, that version is dissolving. Not because you failed, because you learned. There is a difference, a profound difference. You didn't lose yourself. You discovered where you had been giving yourself away. And now your spirit is reclaiming those pieces, one by one. The energy you invested in overthinking, returning. The energy you invested in waiting, returning. The energy you invested in worrying, returning. The energy you invested in seeking validation, returning. And every piece that returns strengthens you, calms you, grounds you. Until one day, you wake up and realize the silence no longer hurts the way it used to. The memories no longer control you. The uncertainty no longer defines your emotional state. Not because the past changed, because you changed. And that may be the most important revelation of all. The silence was never empty. The silence was sacred. It was creating space. Space for awareness. Space for healing. Space for truth. Space for the version of you that was waiting to emerge all along. And perhaps that's why this message found you now. Because your soul is standing at a threshold. 1 foot in the old story. 1 foot in the new one. And although part of you still looks backward sometimes, something inside you is already moving forward. Quietly, steadily, powerfully, toward a life where your peace is no longer dependent on someone else's choices. Toward a life where your worth no longer needs confirmation. Toward a life where love no longer requires self-abandonment. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to force that transformation. It's already happening. The silence is proof. Because what feels like an ending is often the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. There is something nobody talks about when a connection begins changing. Everyone talks about letting go, moving on, healing, detachment. But very few people talk about what happens afterward, the strange space that exists between who you were and who you're becoming. Because something begins happening when your energy finally stops chasing. Something subtle, something almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. The person who once occupied your thoughts begins feeling your absence in ways they never expected. Not because you're trying to make them miss you, not because you're playing a game, not because you're withholding your energy, but because your energy is no longer unconsciously reaching for them. And that changes the entire emotional atmosphere surrounding the connection. For so long, they were used to your presence, used to knowing you cared, used to knowing some part of your heart remained available, even during silence, even during distance, even during confusion. There was still a feeling, an invisible certainty, a quiet knowing that your energy remained connected to theirs, and perhaps they never fully appreciated what that certainty gave them until it started disappearing. Because certainty is one of those things people rarely notice while they have it. They notice it when it's gone. They notice it when they wake up one morning and something feels different, when a familiar emotional comfort is missing, when the energy they've grown accustomed to no longer feels accessible. This is strange, because what they're feeling isn't necessarily your absence. It's the absence of access, and those are two very different things. You can be physically distant from someone and still feel emotionally connected. But when emotional access begins fading, the shift becomes impossible to ignore, especially for someone who never expected it to happen. Something important is coming through. For a long time, they thought they understood the connection, thought they understood you, thought they understood the role you would always play in their life. But they never expected your healing. They expected your patience. Your loyalty, your understanding, your willingness to remain emotionally available. But they didn't expect the day would come when your energy began choosing itself. And that's exactly why they can't stop thinking about you. Because your transformation disrupted the story they had unconsciously created. The story where you would always be there, always care, always wait, always understand. And now, that story no longer feels certain. Have you ever noticed how the mind becomes obsessed with things it doesn't fully understand? Questions, mysteries, unfinished conversations, unresolved emotions. The human mind naturally returns to what feels incomplete.